Hi, everyone. Welcome back to 20s Talks, the unspoken truth. I hope everyone's doing okay. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, which is just basically how to stay motivated when you're quote unquote playing the long game. When you have goals in mind and it's not very clear how you're going to get there. And on this episode, I have a special guest with me. I have Emily from the Language Confidence podcast, and she's going to be on today's episode, and we're just going to be having a little chat. So I'm going to hand it off to Emily if she wants to introduce herself.
Hi everybody, Stephanie, thank you so much for having me on your podcast too. I've been so looking forward to this all day. I mean, always love the chance to chat with you. So yes, very excited. I am Emily from the Language Confidence Project, and when I originally approached Stephanie about this topic, what we first talked about was, well, how do we reinvent our lives? And we were talking about it, and what it evolved to be was, okay, but how do we play the long game? Once we're in that path of, I need to reinvent myself. I want to redo, I want to rebuild, I want to go after this completely new goal. How do we actually do that? Because the world is so full of people telling us, I made the change, I made the decision, and then within 3 months, look where I was. Yeah. My life was different. It was unrecognizable. I made that decision, I made that change, and all of a sudden, everything changed, everything happened. And the reality for so many of us is so different from that. And so what I wanted to do was bring my the journey that I've been on for the past 4 years and everything that I've been learning along the way, and have a conversation really about how do we show up for our really big goals.
Yeah. So you mentioned the journey. Can you just tell us a little bit about that journey that you went on and you're still on?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I was the overachieving student at school. I was the quiet student, the helpful student, the one that wanted 100% in everything. I was always the one that everybody thought would do really, really well. And I genuinely believed that I was doing everything to be on track to do really, really well. And I went from school to a top university, and I graduated, and I was like, I have done everything the world asked me to do. And I kind of thought all of that stuff was going to pay me back. And what actually happened was that I started the career, I started building, and then at 28, everything changed. And in short, so when I was 28, that was the very beginning of the pandemic. I had ended up in a job that I could not stay in. I stayed there for 3 months and 1 day. And I quit my job in January of 2020. By March of 2020, I was on the 3rd stage of interviews for 3 more jobs, but we went into lockdown and everything was halted. And in the months that followed, obviously I hadn't got a job. I lost my home. I lost my 2 most important people in the world. And I was just thinking, I've gone right back to the bottom of the snakes and ladders board. I've got no idea what I am doing, what I'm working towards. Everything has slipped through my fingers. It was just, and of course we were in full lockdown with everything that was going on within the pandemic. So it wasn't like the rest of the world carried on while I was in this sinkhole. Everything else stopped too. And it meant that at the age of 28, I just needed to rebuild everything. And that was incredibly daunting because in order to start rebuilding, the first question you need to ask is, well, what do I want?
Yeah.
And that is a tough question when you're right in that dark tunnel of, I've lost everything, everything's gone, I don't know how, the world isn't the way I thought it was. And so what actually then happened was lots of small projects. So in the beginning of the pandemic, I started this sort of little mini project for myself called the Loneliness Project, where I started talking to university students who had been, who'd gone into university accommodation abroad. They were doing their year abroad, they were doing Erasmus, and they'd gone thinking they were going to get all this like linguistic and cultural enrichment. They were so excited, they were going on an adventure, except that they weren't, because they were stuck in their university accommodation, not improving in their language, not doing all the things that they thought they were going to do. So I started this project of language exchanges with people in the countries that were going into lockdown just before we did, talking to them in the language. For me, that was French and Spanish at the time. And so I was doing language exchanges with them, working with them in their English, working, with me in French or Spanish. And it led to learning Portuguese, because a whole series of things just fell into place there. And I documented on social media how I was learning Portuguese, just on online language exchanges with people in Brazil. And that meant that more people came to me and were learning languages alongside me, and we were talking about the journey of language learning, and it evolved into something beautiful. But even that was only really the start of the journey, and I'm still very much on mine. This is not a story today of, well, this is what happened in 2020 and now at 2024 I'm done, I'm at the top of my mountain. Like, this is not. But it set the wheels in motion for what came next, which was the start of the Language Confidence Project podcast. We hit 300 episodes last Friday, which is, unbelievable to 2021 Emily. And it's brought so many conversations into play about how we do long goals. Because when I help people in their language learning, really it's a very parallel journey to the one that I'm on in setting up the Language Confidence Project and rebuilding the rest of my life. It's, well, how do we set objectives? How do we show up? How do we know what we want? How do we know who we are? And then work with that person to actually do what we're trying to do. Yeah. So that is my journey up until now.
Yeah, it's quite a wild journey. And what would you say are like some common mistakes that you've seen? Because you say you've been helping other people, trying to learn new languages. What would you say are some of the common mistakes that you see people make who are trying to chase long-term goals, the kind of mistakes that they seem to be making?
Okay, well, I would say the first one, and this is both in language learning and in business, it's the same kind of mistake. I wouldn't even call it a mistake, but just something that's gonna get in the way. So many times I see adults who want to learn a language. They think, right, I need to learn this language. The one time they learned a language was in school, French, Spanish, German. And so they set about just recreating their classroom. They set themselves up a corner of their table, they get textbooks out, they give themselves rules, they take away their own privileges when they don't do what they said they were going to do, and they talk to themselves quite often like what they remember their teachers did. And of course, as an adult, quite often we're not learning a language in order to pass whatever the exams are at 16 or 18. We're learning a language because maybe we married into another culture, maybe we're thinking about moving to another country, or we already have. So what we want when we're learning for those goals is actually very different from what the 14-year-old version of us was doing in a classroom of 30 plus students with exams at the end. So that's the first mistake. And you see it equally in business when people are setting up their own business because they want to escape all of the things that made them unhappy about their workplace or corporate life. And they quickly morph into their own worst boss with the self-talk, with the unreasonable expectations, with the deadlines that are either too short or too vague. So that would be the first one. Not realizing that actually you can do this freely, you can do it compassionately, and you don't have to recreate the models that you saw and hated. The second mistake, I think, would be the need for instant clarity. One thing that's been so apparent on my journey so far is how foggy it all feels most of the time. You know, it's great when you've got a massive goal with this really clear, beautiful image of exactly what you're going to be doing, how it's going to feel, be talking to. That is, in one sense, a goal in itself, you know, to have that image. But when you're on a really big goal and you're rebuilding and you're reinventing, that is not probably going to be your first starting point. It's not going to be what you're working towards in the beginning. Quite often what you're working towards is more vague than that. It's a feeling, or it's a, this is my area of curiosity and I don't know where it's going to take me, but I need to dive into it because something inside me is telling me I need to be there. Later, you can build that image of my pinnacle, the summit of my mountain is I am in this Spanish bar, talk fluent Spanish with my friends, or I am the CEO of a company that hires this many people and we're well known for this, and all of that can come. But it's certainly not your starting point. So it would be a real mistake to think I can't start until I have that, because you have to build that. Third mistake would be the need for instant results. Because so much of what goes into a really long journey, whether that's language learning, writing a book, doing a PhD, starting a business, is uncomfortable moves. You know, putting yourself out there, pitching to a podcast, putting yourself on social media, or launching a thing, or telling people that you now are a writer or an actress or whatever it might be. And so often, you know, you've got all of that build up to that moment where you launch, or you tell that person, or you are on that podcast. And then you do the thing, and then a lot of people think, I must have done it wrong, nothing changed. But actually, it's not that something went wrong, it's that that's just not what progress often looks like in this whole game. You know, you put something in, but it's like sowing a seed. And it's not like your actions are a mirror where you do a thing and it immediately reflects back to you with money or with accolades or with some kind of opportunity like just flowing towards you. It's kind of more like the idea of sunlight or starlight, where actually the light that's coming to you was sent a long time ago, so you're really doing it for future you know. But you have to be able to sit with that and realize that you've got to be thinking longer term than, well, I did this thing on Monday and on Friday nothing has happened. So I would say they are the main mistakes that you have to recognize that they are forces that are going to drain your energy if you're not careful, and they're going to make the journey unpleasant.
That's absolutely true, because even with just any little thing, like you were saying, you're trying to learn a new language, writing a book, starting a project, any little thing, like the most common things I always hear people say is just like, oh, what if, like they're just scared to get out there and scared to put themselves out there because of fear of being perceived. Because I've had this podcast now for, it's like I was telling you, like it's been a year now. In a couple of days we'll make it a year.
Congratulations.
June 24th I launched last year.
Yeah.
So now I'm just looking back because I remember even today I went back and I listened to like my very first episode, and I was so shy.
Yes.
I was so shy, and I didn't even want to, like, my speaking, like I didn't have a lot of speaking confidence. And now I look back at where I look, like where I am now, and it's such a 180. Like my camera presence is much better, like I speak much clearer, everything
Yeah.
is 10 times much better. And that's something that a lot of the time, if you don't take that time to reflect and be like, even though you think that you're not growing, you actually have to reflect and be like, but me this time last year, I was a complete different person. So yeah, it's something that it's very helpful to even just have that little moment of, if you're trying to do something and you're just like, why is it not growing? Why is this not happening how I want it to go? Like it's not going to be a linear linear
Yeah.
trajectory. You just have to look back and say, okay, even me 2 weeks ago, I've improved something. Me a couple of months ago, things are getting better. So it's not just a linear kind of trajectory that you always see. And along with that as well, I wanted to ask, like, how would you, like, what kind of tips would you give, or what helped you to stay motivated while you're like, you're not seeing the result that you want, but you're not going to give up either? So what kind of drives that motivation also?
Okay, I would say for me, people are the single most important thing to staying motivated, because there are so many ways in which you can feel isolated on a journey like this. Whether, again, it's the language, it's the PhD, it's the writing a book, it's the business, it can be so easy, first of all, for us to tunnel into just this tiny space of duties and every day I must do this, and circumstances and scarcity, the fears of what we might lose or what isn't coming, or all of those sorts of things. And one of the single best ways not to end up tunneling into just, fog is bringing people into your journey. And that doesn't mean telling everybody. It doesn't mean telling people who might actually throw you off with unsolicited advice or by not being particularly supportive or anything like that. But even if you're super introverted, just having that presence online, maybe social media, having a steady stream of podcasts that you listen to or you watch, so that you've got role models, listening and reading different people's stories about similar but not too similar journeys, so that you don't immediately go into self-comparison, but you do have people that will also just confused for a really long time, or frustrated, or they were trying to grow in a certain way and the growth wasn't happening. Or the more you're surrounded by those discussions, the more it counters, especially when you are in a community where everybody else around you seems to be kind of sorted. Because this is one of the biggest drivers, I think, of the quarter life crisis. You're surrounded by people who have what you don't have. And it's true that maybe they don't have something that you have, but you don't naturally see that. You think, wow, this person is in, this much security and they've got all these opportunities coming to them. And so I think what we often need is voices of people who are also doing weird and wonderful things, that are also just lost, that are also figuring it out, that don't have an obvious path to follow. And it's so good for motivation. It's so good, so much better than trying to figure it all out on your own. And the other thing that I think is really important for motivation is keeping up an idea of what you're doing this all for. Because it can be so easy to just get caught up in what you need to do every day, the individual tasks on a to-do list. And quite often, your to-do list tasks don't look very glamorous. I need to send this email, I need to do this gap fill exercise. And none of those feel like the kind of tasks that are going to take you to greatness. The gap between this boring thing that you need to do this morning that might take you half an hour, to this massive goal that you're trying to get to, it seems really, there's a real disjunct there. So I would say having that really clear view, not again that you're starting with, but that you're working towards of, and this is how I want to feel, and this is where I want to be, and this is what it's going to feel like and smell like and look like, and this is what I want in the future. So it's never just publish a book or learn whatever language. It's I want to be in this room, having these conversations, feeling like this. It's an image that you're building towards. And I think keeping that image in whatever form it's currently at, so it doesn't need to be, again, at 100%, but just wherever you've got to with that image, holding it really close, it's so important for motivation.
Yeah, yeah. So, what would you say are, because I know sometimes it can be, people's mindset can be kind of holding them back in a sense that's like they're not using the right mindset to chase that type of goals. What would you say are like the mindset that you should have to keep going forward and to kind of persevere?
I think the only mindset really is I'm going to encounter obstacles. That is if there's one single mantra or one single thing that I think is present in whatever of these journeys, it's going to be that this is not going to be plain sailing. It's not always going to be obvious. Sometimes it's going to be difficult, frustrating. We're going to learn things that take us miles out of our comfort zone. And getting used to being uncomfortable, getting used to being a beginner, getting used to trying something and it not working, that is the single biggest thing that I think gets in the way for so many people, because they encounter problems and they think, I was always really clever before, why am I suddenly stupid now? Or they think this is really embarrassing, or anybody else could surely have sorted this by now. And that we need to be uncomfortable in this and think that's okay. And I know that for overachievers in general, we've spent our entire lives getting stuff right. You know, a lot of us were not experimenters before this. We started out learning rules, following rules, being really good at it, doing it quietly, not making a fuss, not asking questions. And so, especially for those people, there has to be a real shift. First of all, like I said, obstacles are fine, but also experimenting is okay. And that means we're not going to get it right every time. And we're not going to find everything easy or find everything just like we know how to ace it immediately. You go in thinking, I don't even know what it looks like to be good at this. Or I don't even know what I'm aiming for, but I'm just in this weird land that I never came into before. Yeah,
those are very, very good advice. Yeah, because even with just having that mindset of like, okay, it's not going to be perfect. Not everything is going to be, I'm still new. I am still trying to get my foot in. A lot of people, they give up very easily because they're not getting where they think that they're going to get very quickly. Like I was seeing on TikTok, I was seeing a video of a girl talking about how she'd always wanted to like start a YouTube, and then she started one. Then just after a couple of months, it wasn't just going where she thought it would go, so she just like abandoned it and left it. And then she wished she had kept going, because this was a couple of years ago. So it's like you always hear stuff like that, and I would say that's also one thing that can kind of help you to be motivated, because you always hear people say, I wish I had started earlier, or just don't give up. So when you're hearing other people say that, you're like, okay, I can still persevere, because that's one thing that I always keep in mind as well. It's like, the hardest part is just to start, because that is the hard, because once you start, you're going to find it much more easier to keep going than to stop and then try and start all over again.
I would add one extra thing to just start, which is just start and trust that you can fix your own problems. Because I think one of the reasons many people quit, especially if they do come into it with that feeling of I need to succeed. You know, they come in, I'm going to start a YouTube. I need to get an A in YouTube. What does an A in YouTube look like? Well, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Well, it's not like being at school where you can just work really hard for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then pass the exam. Like, to get to that level on YouTube, you've got so many different like hoops to jump through, and it's about so many different skills other than just showing up and being on camera and
Yeah.
saying stuff. And that thing of, well, actually, the first quest, whenever you have that sign, for example, nobody's watching my videos, I just put that out, you kind of have to fan it out into not, no one's watching my videos, I'm a failure, how has this happened, why can't I do it, everyone else is doing it, because that's putting your energy into the problem, making it massive and panicking. But what you kind of have to do instead is fan out, no one's looking at my videos, into questions of, you know, what does it take to make a video that people want to see? How do I word it? Who do I need to be telling outside? And all of those different questions that are who or what or how questions, not why can't you, not why are you an idiot, none of that, like just practical Googleable questions that will actually mean that you can make that next step when it looks like you've just hit a wall, or that the doors are closed to you.
Yeah. Very good advice. Yeah. And I also wanted to ask as well, like, what kind of tips or what kind of habits would you say to incorporate more into your life to kind of make that more easier just on yourself?
So I think when we're talking about ideal habits, we need to start with us and our lives and our own bodies and our own personalities. So I think the first thing, as cliche as it sounds, has to be know who you are and know who's showing up this morning. Because there is no point committing to start at 5 a.m. if you know that you always do your best work in the evening. You know, it's not helpful, and it's stressful to you, and it's not going to produce your best work. In every way, it doesn't fit. So you've got to start with the person you are. Look at what sort of a learner you are if your big project involves learning, like a language. Look at where your actual interests and skills are and work with them as much as possible. Because if you don't, you'll be sort of jumping into them in procrastination instead, because you need them, and you. So it's all about alignment when you're setting up those routines and those habits. So I think start by who you are, then look for routines and habits that seem to align with that the best, and try them out. Maybe they'll work, maybe they won't. Maybe they won't work now, but you can bank them in, you know, your brain for later, for when your circumstances change or your project changes. So start experimenting as quickly as possible, but starting with you, not with the person that you wish you were, or the really cool person that's suggesting it. So I would say that is definitely important. I journal every single day, which is something that I know that lots of people talk about, and there are loads of different ways to journal. It's a great way to be clear on what you're doing in the day, to show up with feelings, thoughts, something you're reading that's interesting that you want to note down, where you're at in your journey. And it's a great way too of seeing where you're at with milestones and things like that in your journey. But again, it doesn't need to be every single day continuous prose for 45 minutes. If that's not going to fit what you're currently working on, the fact that you hate writing, you can audio record. The fact that you've only got 10 minutes a day, you can bullet point it. You know, there are so many ways of fitting a habit into your life. But it starts with knowing, I hate writing, I'm really busy, I'm balancing a whole load of things, I get distracted a lot, so I'm not going to commit to an hour's worth of journaling a day. Yeah, and it really does help then to create habits you'll stick to naturally, rather than ones you have to contort yourself into.
It's a very good advice, because that knowing yourself, one, that's very important, because when you know that certain things just don't work with you, there's no point trying to force yourself to be that way or do something like that, because people online are saying that's the optimum way to do it. Because everyone may say, oh, you're weird for doing something a certain way, but if it works for you, it works for you. There's no point trying to do something that works for someone else and you're trying to incorporate that into your routines and your daily habits, and you're struggling. There's no reason for you to be struggling trying to change the way that you are. So it's very important on that, guys, to just be yourself. If you see a piece of advice that's like, okay, you want to try it out, if it's not working for you and it just, you can't keep up with it long term, there's no point in trying to force yourself to do it because people online say this is what you should do. So yeah, it's very, very, very good tip on that one.
Yeah, you have to start with the person that you are
Yeah.
in any of these journeys.
Yeah. Just as we're rounding up a little bit, what's like one piece of advice that you would just give anyone who's trying to start a long-term goal that they're not really sure how the path's gonna be? Just one piece of advice that you would offer.
I think it's reach out to people that are doing something similar. Again, not similar in the sense of they're building the business you're building or they're writing a book that's similar to yours. That's too similar. But people that are doing the weird and wonderful things. And it doesn't need to be networking. It doesn't need to be sleazy. It doesn't need to be extroverted if you are not extroverted. It can just be having these people in your orbit. It might be YouTubers and podcasters that don't even know you exist, if that's the sort of comfort level that would be good for you. It could be having an accountability partner that you message or have a video call with once a week, once a month. But having people around you keeps you grounded. It keeps that perspective when it feels like everything is foggy or dark. And having other people to talk to also means that when you do come up against these obstacles, your first thought isn't, what's wrong with me? Because you realize everybody is going through some flavor of doubt and uncertainty and frustration. Yeah. It makes all the difference. It really does. And I cannot impress upon you enough how much I've lent on so many authors, casters, YouTubers during my time, as well as friends and people that I've met, and people that are on business journeys, creative journeys. It's the single biggest way to sort of refill that creative tank, I suppose.
Yeah, because social media is, for the most part, it's free. There's a lot of useful things that you can use social media to do: research, books, finding people. Yeah, it's a very, very good tool to use to even try and find other people you can talk to, people in your niche, like they say. Even there's a community for everyone. So it's very important. Yeah. If you're struggling, also don't be scared to reach out to people who you can trust. Just to reach out. Closed mouths don't get fed. Like, you're never gonna, if you're struggling with something, there's no point in just sitting with it and struggling alone. Two is better than one, like they say.
Definitely.
To fix the problem. So there's no point in just trying to be a lone wolf, get it done yourself. If you're struggling, reach out to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, this has been such an interesting chat. I wish you could go on for longer. I've absolutely loved this chat. I hope you guys at least gained something from this chat, even if it's to not give up. Just stick to it. Whatever it is you're doing, whatever your side hobby is, your goals are, just stick to it, to persevere, because you're going to look back and thank yourself that you didn't quit while you were there. It's going to be such a learning experience, but it's also going to be rewarding as well.
Yeah, think about future you.
Think about future you. Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed all those tips and tricks. It's been such a very interesting episode. So yeah, I'm just gonna ask Emily if she has anything she wants to share, anything upcoming she wants to promote, her links and channels.
So you can find me on YouTube. I am the Language Confidence Project, and I upload videos every weekday, just 5 to 10 minutes of language courage. But to be honest, the questions that we cover there are really about motivation, goal setting, all the sorts of things, the doubts, dealing with the inner critic that come up in creative and entrepreneurial journeys too. Which brings me to the next massive exciting project, which is on September the 2nd. And that is going to be the release of my new podcast, which is called Hope Questing. And there we are going to be talking to all sorts of extraordinary people who are doing really weird and wonderful and pathless things. about how they've reached their goals, how they show up every day when there are no guarantees, how they keep going when there are rejections, when there are obstacles, and what it actually looks like to show up every day and deal with the doubts and the frustration and all the things that go with it to make that path actually possible. And I'm so excited about it. It's going to be a really practical podcast. It's not going to be just sort of a showcase of people
Yeah.
doing wonderful things, but it's going to really dive into what the day-to-day look like and how we
Mm.
can learn about just how to do it. And I'm so excited about it.
Sounds really exciting. I can't wait for that to come out just to hear the different perspectives, because something I love now is just talking to people, just getting to know different people, getting to know what their day to day is like. I'm very nosy, so I'm going to be very interested in that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. I'll have all the links, that everything Emily mentioned, those would be in the description as well. So it would be easy for you guys to just go into it, click it. It should take you right there. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much.